It is. If you like this one,
Welcome to the viewing and listening audience to the 20th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Today, the committee is convening its second public hearing pursuant to its examination of the existing anti-fraud and customer protection systems in the financial services sector of Trinidad and Tobago. Members of the listening and viewing audience are invited to post or send their comments via the Parliament's various social media platforms, Facebook, the Parliament's YouTube channel, ParlView, and Twitter. I wish to welcome formally the officials of the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago. I will invite members of this committee to introduce themselves, starting from my right.
Good morning, everyone. Simon Inobrega, member.
Morning, everyone. Lawrence Hislop, member.
Good morning, JSC Lachmidial, member.
Good morning, everyone. Keith Scotland, member.
Good morning, Hassel Bacchus, member.
Good morning, Saddam Hussein, member.
Thank you very much, members. Can I ask or invite the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago to introduce their members? I'm sorry.
Good morning, committee chair, committee members. I am Gail Passos, the president of the Bankers Association.
Good morning. I am Richard Downey, managing director, RBC, member of the board, Bankers Association.
Good morning, members. I am Nigel Batiste, board member of BAT and the managing director of Republic Bank Limited.
Can I invite the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago to introduce its members?
Hi, good morning to committee members. I am Joseph Remy, president of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, Chair, other committee members. My name is Aldrich Neptune. I am the vice president of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, Chair and members. Yes, I am Michael Hernandez. I'm the treasurer on the league, the Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago.
Good morning, members. I am Diane Joseph, Chief Operating Officer of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you very much and welcome again. And before I go into the inquiry, the objective of the inquiry, I just wish to offer apologies on behalf of the chair of this committee, which is Senator Thompson Ahi, who is unable to attend today's hearing because she's unwell. My name is Marvin Gonzalez, and I am the vice chair of the committee and have the honor to deputize on her behalf. The main objectives, and that is for the purpose and the benefit of our listening and viewing audience with respect to their understanding of the main objectives of this hearing. The first item is to determine the nature and the prevalence of fraudulent practices, cybersecurity threats, and other operational risks within the financial services sector. 2, to gain greater insight into the impact of such practices, threats, and risk on the well-being of clients and customers. 3, to determine the mechanisms that are being utilized by commercial banks and other financial services providers to counteract financial fraud, cybersecurity threats, and other related risks. And 4, to determine the contribution that the state actors can make in counteracting fraudulent practices, cybersecurity threats, and other related risks within the financial services sector. Yeah, I have that. So can I invite Ms. Gail Passos, who is the president of the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago, managing director, senior vice president, and head Caribbean South and East at Scotiabank, Trinidad and Tobago. I hope I do have that correct, to make opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. So, if you would please permit me to provide some broad information on BAT. As committee members may know, BAT comprises 8 member banks operating in Trinidad and Tobago, which provide a range of financial products and services to members of the public. The association provides a platform across which common matters of interest to the banking and financial services industry are identified, deliberated, and managed. Each member institution is represented by its managing director, who together comprise our board of directors. The board is supplemented by a number of subcommittees comprising executive members or senior management of member institutions. And I would say the primary objective of BAT is really to promote sound and ethical banking practices and standards in Trinidad and Tobago. The association also promotes public understanding and trust in the banking sector, supplementing messages to customers and the public at large on key matters that have consumer impact within the sector. These include things like customer rights, expectations of financial institutions, financial inclusion, education and awareness, including, as we're speaking about today, anti-fraud awareness. With respect to today's proceedings, let me first say that the association is pleased to participate, and we certainly hope that the information that we share, the contributions that we're making, will be able to positively impact the Parliament, understanding that a safe and secure banking environment is paramount both to banks as well as to the customers. Committee members would notice that our submissions are reflective of the financial services industry. So what we had presented prior is certainly not a bank-by-bank view, but an overall financial industry review. And so, enabled to do this, BAT's individual members would have provided information to an accounting firm who assisted us in collating the information. We hope that the information that we presented is useful to the committee, but certainly if during the course of your deliberations any other areas are in fact uncovered or new questions arise, we are happy to provide further submissions. And certainly, we want you to be assured of our ongoing willingness to participate. Chair, should we proceed with a walkthrough of the presentation, or would we just prefer to have questions? Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. So can I also invite Mr. Joseph Remy, who is the president of the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago, to make opening remarks?
Thank you very much, Chairman, and to all members of this honorable committee. It's our pleasure to be here as representative of the Cooperative Credit Union movement. The Cooperative Credit Union League, just some historical background, is the umbrella body for credit unions in Trinidad and Tobago. And our primary functions are to lobby, advocate, and provide training and developmental opportunities for credit unions throughout the length and breadth of Trinidad and Tobago. We continue to provide that platform for credit unions to ensure that they enhance the relationship with their members by giving them opportunities to be aware of all the modern developments that are taking place in the cooperative credit union sector and by extension in the financial services sector within which credit unions operate. And we take this very seriously because we believe that the movement has that touch points with the society because of the demographic spread of credit unions. And as such, we believe we have a critical role to play in ensuring that we provide protection for members' funds and members' deposits, and in terms of when they access credit, it is done in a manner that would provide some level of safety and soundness. We have been very privileged to be here. We believe it's an honor for us to be present to provide our information relative to what credit unions can do and how credit unions have been operating in this very dynamic and evolving financial services sector, particularly with respect to the issues of cybersecurity and fraudulent activities. And we normally make the boast that we believe we are one of the more secure sectors because of the relationship we have with our members and the knowledge that we have with the members at each credit union. So the incidents of fraud and those things are not as prevalent in the sector as we We believe it may be in other sectors, and we would want to continue to provide whatever input and guidance we can in terms of enhancing that secure network to ensure that our members' funds are secure, and by extension it provides that comfort to the respective communities within which credit unions operate. And we take the boast that credit unions, because of their relationship with their communities, everyone knows one another. It provides us with some level of comfort as the first reporting line, because members will always ensure that they don't have other members do things that will endanger their funds. And we are comforted in that knowledge. We would have provided information based on the questionnaire, and we would have provided the information from a broad general perspective. And we believe this opportunity that has been afforded to us now to be present in person, to answer and to elaborate on some of those responses is something that we cherish, and we anticipate that as we go along, whatever support that the Cooperative Credit Union League could provide to the advancement of this cause, which is a noble cause, because the incidence of cybersecurity and fraud is something that is detrimental to the social stability of our country. And we are prepared and willing to continue any engagement that we believe is possible and necessary to ensure that we provide a safe and sound environment for our members to conduct their business. And thanks much for the opportunity once again.
Thanks very much, Mr. Remy, for that. Just an item of housekeeping that all members, as well as officials before us, will direct their questions and or concerns through the chair. And once you're acknowledged, you put on the device, the microphone, and you make your submissions, and at the end, you take off the microphone. Okay? Very, very simple matter or item of housekeeping. So I'll ask and invite members of the committee to pose their questions to the officials before us, starting with Member Scotland.
Chairman, I'm very grateful.
Use your microphone.
Chairman, good morning. I'm very grateful for your kind indulgence. May I start with the Bankers Association? I am very happy that you have outlined your role, but from the outlining of your role and my understanding of your relationship with the central bank and what we consider a lack of enforcement powers, a lack of teeth, do you think it may, the association, may be better served in the public if you morph into a self-regulatory organization with some powers of coerciveness?
Yes. That's a little bit of a tough one. I think it's very difficult to advocate for a self-regulated financial market. I think what we continually work towards as a bankers association is more so a collaborative sort of interaction with the regulator.
You agree with me, however, that sometimes the first port of call of a collaborative effort may not work. And if you are an association, and a very significant and important association, or by the way, the Credit Union League, I'm going to ask you that same question. So I wouldn't want that 10 seconds pause. You are forewarned. But don't you think it will give you more teeth to have that structure in place so that you can have coercive powers, you can have powers of oversight, but regulatory oversight, instead of the unregulated lagly that you have now?
I recognize Mr. Batiste. Mr. Batiste?
Thank you, Chair. Member Scotland, I'm not sure I agree with the premise that the central bank does not have the regulatory powers required.
No, I say that it has, but I'm saying so that the premise is that the central bank has. My question to you is, and the framework is, what about you? So that's the question.
Okay, so
what about your organization?
I don't think the Bankers Association as an organization needs to have the coercive powers. I believe that what is necessary is, if there's any strengthening that is required, is strengthening on the central bank's powers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batiste. Can I invite Member Lakshmi Dayal Ramdale to...
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to that question, you mentioned that one thing that BAT would look at would be industry standards. Now, you want to have best practices and industry standards, but amongst your members, there may be variations in terms of how those standards are being applied. If I could draw reference to, for example, the way the stock exchange operates as an SRO regulated by the TTSEC, would you not envision a role, something like that, for BAT to evolve into a role like that? Don't you think it would be helpful to enforce industry standards? Because what you can do is you can sit and you can discuss industry standards and best practices, but you can't really enforce it amongst your members or establish some sort of monitoring system to ensure that those best practices and industry standards are being implemented. So through you, Chair, I think I just want to clarify what we are speaking about and to draw an analogy between, like, for example, what you can become in terms of like a stock exchange type entity that would still come under the regulation of the government's regulator, which is like TTSEC and Central Bank.
Mr. Batiste?
So the Central Bank, as you will be aware, has published its own best practice guidelines for cybersecurity, as well as guidelines for many other aspects of banks' operations. And those guidelines, quote unquote, really are more or less policy directives from the Central Bank. And in terms of ensuring that the guidelines are adhered to, the Central Bank does its own inspections to ensure. So we started with a self-assessment of the banks against the guidelines that were issued by the Central Bank. And that self-assessment then progresses to the Central Bank doing its own inspection of your adherence to its guidelines. And failure to adhere to the guidelines does result in consequences for the various financial institutions. So, I maintain my position from before.
Well, Chairman, through you, it seems that there's no porousness on the part of the Bankers Association. Bankers Association, I know the question may have caught you by surprise, but don't you think that there may be some merit in a review? Because the Central Bank, when they came before us, Chair, was sort of indicating that, yes, they have a regulatory framework, but they sort of said, well, you know, the association also can have their own structure in a certain way which will have a synergy that will assist, and the bottom line here is try to assist your operations in reducing the amount of fraudulent activities that occurs. So maybe you could consider it upon sober reflection and not take, I'm getting a sort of imporousness. I hope it's it's just me, but I hope that there's some ability to permeate and for you just to consider it. I see Mr. Downey wants to, maybe he may wish to agree with me.
Members want to respond to Mr. Scotland's Mr. Downey?
Through you, Chair, Member Scotland, it is food for thought to consider things like that. But, you know, what I would say is the financial industry is very strongly regulated in all aspects and various aspects. Within this space, it is certainly in the cybersecurity space, it's fairly new and it's evolving. And we continue to share best practices, not just among banks who are both locally and internationally run, but with those of Central Bank. And of course, Central Bank, who is our regulator, we continue to share with them things that are being done, are taking place, which would have led to recently where Mr. Batiste mentioned the whole guidelines around cybersecurity. So there are areas that we continue to collaborate with Central Bank on. As an association, it was always to promote a fair and an efficient running banking sector and to ensure fairness guidelines that we all follow to ensure that we have a properly running financial industry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brownlee. Can I invite Member Hislop?
Thank you, Chair. Morning again, officials. We want to jump into the issue of financial fraud because that's one of the main objectives why we're here this morning. And in your submission, you would have shared with us that the aggregate value of reimbursements for 2022 and 2023 was in the vicinity of for 22, it was in the vicinity of 4.905 million, and in 2023, 4.1 million. But that, as it relates to reimbursement to citizens or to your clients, share with us what is the usual criteria that a customer must satisfy in order to be reimbursed from a fraudulent transaction.
Through you, Chair, I will take that question. All member banks would typically follow, especially where it will speak to more that of the debit and the credit card type fraud activity. Those networks, Visa, MasterCard, will have international regulations as to how we proceed with claims and to handle fraudulent or claims in terms of the methods of chargebacks. Those chargebacks processes involve the person making the claim submitting evidence of the claim and presenting that to the member bank, who will then submit that if it's within their own member bank to solve it themselves or to send it through the network for arbitration. This process can take from as little as 2 to 3 weeks as long as 3 months. There is a timeline upon which, once that timeline passes, there's what's called time barred. So it is incumbent on the person to pick up these issues early so that it could be looked into as quickly as possible. So hopefully that would have answered your question.
So just for clarity, to you, Chair, for it to be, so time barred speaks to the time the client reports it.
Yes, correct. In terms of it being to go through that process, you must make that report within 3 months. To, let's say it's a transaction that was done in another country, you are time barred within 3 months of that transaction to submit that query for arbitration. If that's not done, it's unable to proceed through the normal arbitration process through the member networks.
Could you share with us in terms of, I don't know if you want to look at it from a percentage standpoint as to, I don't know if you have that information with you or you could provide it to us in writing. How many transactions, fraudulent transactions, do you think have run that time barred period? And how many clients have not been able to recoup? The time barred, I think it's 3 months, right?
Through you, Chair, just to clarify, time barred means initiation of the query.
Yeah, right. Initiation of the,
so,
yes.
Yeah.
Of the
that
query.
information we don't have at hand.
Can you provide it in writing?
So you can provide.
Can you provide it in writing?
We would have to look to see if there's a way we can track that. I'm not sure it's something we are tracking to know clients who they will come in and make the request and a submission will be made, but we can look into it.
Okay. Chair, if I could just defer to...
Of course.
Just to intervene on that particular question. So I would understand the difficulty you would have if something is not initiated, then you can't track it. I think the piece would be if there are things that are requested to be initiated that are out of time, if you catch that alone. But more than that, I think what would be of interest would be how many in the overall scheme of things that actually don't get to the point of reimbursement. So the number of people who would have applied, not within the time frame, supplied information for whatever reason, that it didn't lead to a reimbursement. Is this probably to have a success rate for reimbursement as a percentage, if we could do that? I think that is where we're going. Yeah. So thank you, Chair.
Chairman, I go back through you.
You would like to give them an opportunity to respond, and then we'll go to members.
So it is that we can take that back and have that looked into.
Okay, so can you provide the information for us in writing if the information can be obtained?
We will look into that.
Okay, thank you very much. Member Scotland?
Chairman.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
We move to...
Yeah.
Is it that the client must report is it that a client must report, or does the bank not have, do the banks not have the ability to pick up a transaction that is fraudulent on its own?
Through you, Chair, many transactions that are done fraudulently, as you know, we'll use an example of a credit card, and there's a breach at Amazon.com or whatever. Those transactions are through the networks would be notified, compromised, and there are things initiated through the banks where charge reversals are done automatically. If a client picks up something and they want to query it, that process of initiation by the client leads to what you call a chargeback process. But there are transactions that would happen, and that's a daily practice of a file. Sometimes it's erroneous, it's not really fraud. Sometimes it could just be issue with a file coming through and gets reversed. Some of those may at times confuse the client because they just saw a reversal and they put it down to fraud. So you have operational errors that get corrected, and then you have those that truly fraudulent activity that we were told that somebody's database was compromised. These credit card numbers were on the list. We therefore have to take action around those things. So we would monitor those cards. We normally reissue cards for those clients, ask them to come in and change out their cards.
Yeah. Thanks for the clarity.
Proactive.
Okay, thanks very much. I recognize Member Scotland again.
Chairman, this is why I had begun my opening question about having some sort of regulatory framework which has some teeth, because you've given a 3-month window for reporting of this. Let's give you an example of, let's say, a mandate, yes? You will still have mandates, yes, to sign in. Let's say that someone does a fraudulent act relative to a mandate, and the bank acting upon that disperses funds elsewhere. Now, you would say 3 months because that is your regulations, but the law of the land says that's 4 years because it becomes statute barred for a suit of recovery in 4 years. I'm not saying that you must go to 4 years because there is some promptitude I know the bank will have with its internal system. But that is far out of whack with the law of the land, which gives the claimant, the customer, 4 years within which to bring a matter. So I am saying, and I think sometimes in fraud, 3 months is unreasonable because, Chairman, if you know the rationale behind fraud is, the reason why you were able to succeed in the first place is because there was some stealth, and they give you a time within which to do this. So maybe, upon sober reflection, you may want to consider, because three months in fraud, and when people lose their money, sometimes it's their whole livelihood. You get the prince from somewhere who says the inheritance is coming to you, and so I am saying, as a body that will have now some more powers than persuasion, you may be able now to set a standard across for you, the members of your association, to say, well, look, 3 months in fraud, it may be a little too pressed. Let's look at the benchmark of 4 years where you can make a civil claim and extend it maybe to 6 months or 8 months, and that's across the board. So any customer from any bank will know this is the time within which you have to bring a complaint.
Ms. Passos?
Thank you, Member Scotland. So just to clarify, the 3 months time frame we were talking about is for dispute resolution for credit cards.
Okay.
So it's not for all fraud. And so specifically what we're saying to customers are review your transactions and raise your hand, lodge a complaint with us so we know that something isn't right. I think 4 years, beyond a 90-day window, is a long time not to have reviewed the types of transaction activity you have on your debit and credit cards.
So can I ask whether the 3-month limitation is really putting an obligation on the customer to constantly review their records and their statements to identify whether or not they determine if any irregular transaction may have taken place on their account. Is that the main rationale for the 3-month limitation? Yes.
Just for further clarification, the 3-month limitation is actually a limitation imposed by the associations, which would be Visa and MasterCard.
Okay.
So they actually set that limitation for credit card related fraud.
Credit card.
So it's not really a Trinidad kind of a situation. That would be an international standard, and it is based on the expectation that when it comes to card transactions, clients would be reviewing their statements on a monthly basis.
Mm-hmm. And is it a rule that is adhered to in a rigid manner, or the bank retains some kind of discretion depending on an individual situation? So
various banks would do different things, but I think the discretion relies on the amount, because banks could decide that they would absorb it, if it's a fairly small amount, but the association rules.
But don't you think that could open the door for some kind of arbitrary exercise of discretion if it is not adhered to across the board in a uniform manner?
Through you, Chair, what we would see is that from a settlement through the associations, or what we call the network associations, they set those timelines. So once those timelines occur, generally it just means you're dealing with, let's say, another member bank in US or Europe. It just ensures that that's the limitation. Member banks can therefore decide for their client, their cardholder who is impacted, what do you want to do based on that scenario? And I think that's where Mr. Batiste went in terms of, depending on the circumstance, what would we do, what can we do in terms of the scenario that unfolded. Around credit cards specifically, we're talking here.
Yeah. Somehow I feel that, it lends itself to a certain level of uncertainty that customers may feel that discretion can be exercised, at their disadvantage, depending on the circumstances. But I do understand the point that you're making. It's just a statement, not necessarily for you to respond, because members of the public are listening, and they will put their personal circumstances, examine it, in the context of what is being said, and so I can hear and feel a member of the public feeling as though that a discretion can be exercised, at their disadvantage, depending on the facts that might be before the bank. So, so can I ask my member Hussein to join the discussion?
Thank you very much, Chair. So far we have discovered, if we're dealing with fraudulent transactions with respect to credit cards, we have a 3-month limitation in which the customer makes their complaint. Listen, my card, this transaction doesn't reflect a transaction that I would have conducted. And you said that is a period for dispute resolution. Now, there's a common theory out there, anecdotally maybe, that when the banks want their money, they come on time for their money. So my question to you is, how long does it take for these particular transactions to be investigated? And if the customer does in fact have a valid claim, how long does the reimbursement period take for the person to get back their money?
So, through the Chair, I'll take that question. The process we refer to commonly is called the chargeback process. It can take anywhere from, I would say, roughly 2 weeks, which is maybe within your bank itself, that you could do your validations. I'll walk you through the process. You do a transaction at a merchant or point of sale, we call it, in England. And it was 2 weeks ago. Maybe you bought dinner and they overcharge you the amount for dinner. So you come back and you say, well, okay, they charged me £200, but it was £100, equivalent in TT. You initiate the chargeback process. What would happen is that client, being the card holder, has to show what the amount was. Okay, this my own showed $100, and somebody thinks would be the person maybe adjusted the tip by 100, so 200 came in. So you say, my claim, I knew it to be £100. We will then present that through the network, makes its way as evidence to the other side, who will go to that merchant and say, show that you have evidence that this person signed or pinned, enter the pin for the $200 amount. That process will be one that can take weeks because of it getting back there. Member has to now reach out to the merchant. Sometimes the disputes get more involved because it's a dispute on the merchant has shown that maybe they have something, maybe it was done fraudulently, maybe somebody faked the signature. We now have to get that to come back to the member bank who requested it. And therefore that back and forth is where we can't settle with the client until we resolve between those two members, is the liability on the member who had the point of sale, who was at fault, or was it my card holder and I'm going to decide, okay, what took place here? Did that card holder do something wrong? Give somebody the card. So sometimes we even ask for evidence of camera footage, if possible. Can we see who did the transaction? Which is like, I never even did the transaction, but is there camera footage? Not always is that available to dispute that you were actually there doing the transaction, sometimes at the ATM or at the point of sale. Most of the times at the point of sale, the card being present and under the PIN means that you were present. And the agreement signed means that you validate that any time a PIN is entered, it means that you were present during the transaction.
Let me just start over. The latter transaction you mentioned, the payment, was processed. Client, no fault of the client, it was in fact fraudulent. How long normally, I'm looking at an average, you said 2 weeks, you gave the first example. For more complex investigations, how long will it take for the person to be reimbursed?
Through Chair, I would expect certainly within the 2 month sort of range, 1 to 2 months.
1 to 2 months.
Once you're able to get a position back and there's nothing pending from the other, what we call the merchant side of the investigation.
Now, I'm looking at a 2 month, 1 month, 2 month period, and sometimes it could be a substantial sum of money that could have been engaged in this fraudulent transaction. If a person is a day late with respect to payments to the bank, interest is accrued. Is it that the customer also gets back some additional compensation, I would put it, because it's no fault of theirs? They have lost money. They have been out of pocket for 2 months, let's say, without this money. In court, we use interest as a measure of out-of-pocket compensation. Is it that the client also will be a beneficiary of this additional payment?
Generally, they are. Once they're able to show that that transaction was fraudulently done and the claim was won, there would be the instance of assessing where either, if there was interest accrued because of the transaction, but typically recommendations are you keep your credit card balances up to date, and based on that, you would therefore manage in terms of being reimbursed.
You see, that's an uncomfortable position because you're now placing the burden on the customer, whereas the bank is the record keeper, and you all are charging basically fees for banking services. And I think the fact of keeping accurate records should be a very essential term of the contract between the customer and the bank. You see, it places the customer, especially those victims of fraud, in a disadvantageous position because they are 2 months without this money that they have lost, 2 to 3 months, let's say, and then you just give them back what was lost in that transaction. What about the same interest rate that the bank normally takes if you're late on payment, giving them back some sort of that compensation? Because I'm not talking about a situation where they would charge interest. In fact, let's say the card was stopped, the transaction, the card is no longer in use. The bank's placed a hold on it, but they have been out of pocket of the money. Is it that you all give them back that additional compensation for out-of-pocket expenses?
Yes. Mr. Batiste?
Mr. Batiste? Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, are you referring to a credit card transaction or a debit card transaction?
We're looking at credit card.
Okay, because in a credit card transaction, once the client has initiated the chargeback, obviously the person would not pay the associated bill, right? So they actually would not be out of pocket. what would happen is that, of course, they would not have access to those funds on their credit card. So in that sense, they are inconvenienced. But they would not be out of pocket because they would not actually have paid it because they have contested the particular charge. I think what Mr. Downey was trying to clarify is that what the banks do, okay, is that to the extent that interest actually ended up accruing on that figure, okay, the bank will actually reimburse that back to the card.
Can we say a reimbursal as opposed to compensation? Is it a reimbursal?
Yeah, it's not a compensation. It's really a reimbursal back to the card.
Okay. And what about debit cards then?
Okay, so debit cards are a little bit different, right? And so for the international debit card, because that's where some of the transactions that Mr. Downey would be referring to occurs, if there is a charge on the chargeback, yes, that may. Yeah, so if there is a debit that has occurred to somebody's debit card, yes, they would be out of pocket with those funds until the funds are reimbursed. And so it's a valid query in terms of whether there's interest that would then kind of be earned on it. I don't know that there's any specific position with respect to it. I'm not aware that really and truly there's been a case where it's kind of gone back and say, okay, fine, what would the interest have been? Normally, the debit cards are placed on checking accounts, so that you try to minimize, and those checking accounts tend to be fairly low interest rates. But so that may be an area that you're saying something to be looked at.
Okay.
I just want to go to the submissions that you would have given to this committee, and let me thank you all for the submissions. And I saw that you all would have given us the benefits of some graphs and some tables. And I'm looking at the incident reports that you all have. There's a line graph with credit cards and debit cards. Now, there have seemed to be some, based on the trends from 2020 to 2023, some success with respect to the number of incidents for debit card frauds. It has decreased from about 3,000 incidents to just under 1,000 now. With respect to the credit cards, I have seen an increase from about 1,000 incidents in 2020, and then there's a closing off period of 2023 where it increased to about 2,700 incidents, just over 2,700 incidents. Is there a specific factor or a cause for this increase over the years in terms of the credit card fraud? Because 2020 to 21 we saw a plateau, but after 21 we saw it start climbing.
Can I ask Ms. Passos, I recognize you.
Through you, Chair. So yes, and good of you, member, who's trying to pick that up. What you're seeing there, so let me take both. So the debit card fraud, you definitely are seeing significant declines. And that decline corresponds with the bank's rollout of chip EMV. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that has seemed to put debit card fraud in check. On the credit card side, what you're seeing there is really the behavioral change of significant online buying.
Online buying?
Online buying, right? So you would have seen as we came through the COVID period, that would have been down because people could not accept their goods. There was no shipments of anything. And then as things opened back up, a significant increase in online purchasing, which of course presents the dynamic of card not present fraud. And so that's the dynamic that you're seeing there. I will, though, say to give some comfort to the committee that while you are seeing an increase in the graph in terms of the number of fraud transactions, there's also a much larger increase in online buying purchases. So the number of transactions, if you were to look at it, have increased substantively over the same time frame. And what you're looking at is mere basis points if you look at the ratio of fraudulent transactions to overall transactions.
Now, we have both the international market and the local market. Mm-hmm. Both we have seen after COVID, we have a lot of small businesses in Trinidad using these electronic transactions now versus the bigger companies like Amazon, the international purchasing. This figure that you gave us here, is it an aggregation of both local purchases and international purchases?
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. It's a consolidation of purchases.
Is it possible we can get a disaggregation?
we can seek to get that disaggregation. I'm not sure how easy it is to achieve, but definitely we can look into that.
Thank you very
Before
much.
I ask our member Hislop, and then we'll go to member Scotland, I'm just curious as to whether you can give us details as to what really is the main contributing factor to that online fraud as it relates to the use of credit cards and online transactions. Is it that fraudsters are getting access to customers' data, or that customers are not adhering to security protocols? Are they being careless in terms of how they utilize the cards? That might be a window where fraudsters are getting access to their information. What, in your view, or the association's view, might be the main contributing factor to fraud associated with online transactions?
Through Chair, what we can say is that typically most of the online fraud would occur through some method of phishing, social engineering, or something called enumeration of the card. The last one, I'll explain a bit what that means. In today's world with AI and other capabilities, people are able to generate an equivalent card once they get enough information. And to do what we call CNP, card not present, I need three things. I need the card number, I need the expiry date, and I need the CVV, the check value at the back of the card. With that, you can attempt a transaction. The networks and the member banks have features and security mechanisms to work against that as well, such as you just did a transaction in Trinidad, and within 2 minutes, a transaction is done in Europe on the same card. Sometimes these things can be picked up and prevented. But what you're seeing is the uplift of that third one called the enumeration. We well know about phishing, which is phishing leads to most of it, which is we get emails, we click on a link, and in that link we think we're going to do a transaction, but the information is captured. So technically the client is responsible for doing that. If they did that, they've exposed themselves. Social engineering as well. It could be you're online or you get a call and somebody says, I'm calling from my help desk to support you. Your laptop or desktop at home has been compromised. I will connect in and fix it for you. And they do this mainly against the elderly. And that elderly person will grant this person access to their desktop or laptop through different means. At that point, that desktop is now compromised. So these are some of the methods that are used. At the end of it, it is a consumer being fraudulently impacted by someone trying to get access to information that should not be shared.
So what would you say to a member of the public listening, viewing this particular discussion as to measures that they can put in place at the personal level to prevent these occurrences?
Well, first off, maybe just to build on that, what we'll say as an association, what we do is cybersecurity and phishing and social engineering are big issues, and all member banks do within their own levels as well as within the Bankers Association promote many aspects of building awareness and education around how these schemes work.
Yes.
So we would be publishing either through our various LinkedIn, social, Instagram or Facebook, things to promote and highlight the practice of what people are doing. So education is key, and we continue to do things to help raise the educational awareness around how these schemes work. When there's a new scheme identified, we try to get that information out there to the general public. A couple points would always be, if you didn't initiate it, question it.
Yes.
Because if unknown to you, somebody calls and like, where did this come from?
Mm-hmm.
You should always reach out and call, not the number the person gives you, but the number you know to call. So do your own independent check. You receive an email, don't click on the link. What you should really be doing is, again, go in and validate what is the link. Go to what you know as valid information. Never utilize an email unsolicited that you've received to act on. So these are some of the common practices, or what we call best practices we recommend to our clients and consumers.
I think very, very pertinent information and guidance. Before I ask Member Scotland to come in, I recognize Member Hislop.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to jump in with two quick questions. As you are on that, the advice to the public, I know this recently happened a couple of weeks ago, so I don't know if the bankers have had any reports of or an uptick or an increase in fraudulent activities since the TT post, since the text message was circulating that you got one. Member says she got one this morning. So I'm concerned that maybe in the next couple of weeks we may have an uptick of fraudulent activities from members of the public who would have gotten caught by the TT Post text message. But quickly, we're dealing with these figures, and the figures of fraud, the value seems to be significant. But I just want to ask, all of you represent, or the Bankers Association represent banks that have entities throughout the Caribbean. Where does Trinidad and Tobago stand in terms of, if you to do a comparative analysis between Trinidad and Tobago and other territories within the region, how do we stand in terms of whether we are, in terms of the fraud, is more significant here than, let's say, in Jamaica or Barbados or one of the other territories?
Who is taking this? Mr. Brown, Mr. Downey?
Yes, I will, and I know this is more of opinion because we don't have financial facts on it. But, part of the role will be having a view across the Caribbean. Generally, what you would tend to see, Trinidad is normally, but we have a larger country. Our economy is much larger. Our population is much larger. But if you will look relative to the population size, the volume, the size of the economy, I think we are well represented, better represented than some of the other countries, because what it means that you've implemented technologies to help protect your client. Some of the other countries will be on its journey to implement changes. What I could say is in the Dutch Caribbean, as an example, which is common knowledge within the banking sector, they tend to follow the European drive quite a lot, because most of them follow that of Holland, and therefore a lot of their payments infrastructure tends to be a little more advanced. But within the wider CARICOM, is that Trinidad and Tobago would tend to be generally, I think, higher up in terms of managing these risks and these exposures. But it can vary depending year to year if a new topology, we like to call them, exists or come about.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. Batiste?
Thank you, Chair. Just to add, there are fraud ratio statistics that are published for different regions and different countries. And the Caribbean is actually very, very low in terms of our fraud ratio percentage relative to other countries in the world. And Trinidad, relative to other countries in the Caribbean, also quite low. And the actual number that you can actually go and find.
What is the main reason for that?
I think Richard was explaining it, right? In the Caribbean generally, some of the metrics that we have in place, or the monitoring systems we have in place, are better. And that's because we try to avoid the fraud.
Don't you think that it might be one of the main reasons is that there's a reluctance by a significant portion of the population to use credit cards and debit cards?
Well, and
accessibility to the financial sector?
Well, I don't know, not to talk about the accessibility as being a reason, but we could talk about it a little bit later. Mm-hmm. The number that I'm referring to, okay, and the reason that we have been able to identify is because in many of the developed countries, they don't have some of the same systems that we have in place for the fraud, because they have determined that the cost of putting those systems in place is not really worth it. And so they accept the fraud, and move forward, whereas we have built a lot of systems in place, right, to actually prevent the fraud from occurring. And that has been what we have identified as being the main difference between ourselves and some of the other more developed countries for whom those similar ratios are published.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Batiste. Member Scotland, you would like to come in here?
Yes, please, Chairman, if you would allow me.
Go ahead.
Chairman, can I ask the Bankers Association to look at page 28, Chairman, of their submissions to us, please? Under the rubric requirement of government to assist in strengthening safeguards and protection system. In your submission, you indicated at, I think it's bullet point 1, that you would require more active prosecution of fraudulent individuals or organizations. What is the nature of the relationship between the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service? That's the first question I want to ask.
Who's taking this?
So I will take that,
Sure.
Chair. So I would say that our security details that exist within each of the individual member banks have formed relationships with the TTPS in order to share information. Sometimes I would say that the process of moving forward to enforcement and so is really very, very slow, delayed.
Very slow on whose, Chairman? On the last occasion, so maybe we need you here and we need the TTPS here, because on the last occasion, this was the submission made on behalf of the TTPS, notwithstanding the compulsion of a production order with the fraud squad. The police have had hurdles in obtaining witness statements since the introduction of the Miscellaneous Amendment Act. And the changes rendered has resulted in some resistance from certain financial institutions to provide information requested in a timely manner. Chairman, this is recorded in our minutes that we confirmed today.
Yeah.
We're not taking sides. But what do you say about this?
Who's taking this? Mr. Downey?
Through you, Chair. Those scenarios are possibly lead to a couple things. One, we probably based on the crime scenario, the ability to go for witness, people to go forward to be witness and provide witness statements has been a bit of a challenge. But so it could delay in getting the right person to come forward and to give evidence. That's one. And it's a dynamic of the environment. All right? Just recently you would have seen things that would have happened in the news. Secondly, can be that around the age of the information being requested. What we've been working with the TTPS to do is sometimes they may ask for information on a case, and you would think the information might be 2 years worth of information. We can get information for the last 20 years. And that request, I hope you would understand, if I was to request information on account for 20 years, can lead to a longer process to pull all that information to get it into the police service.
But you, Chairman, through you again, you would agree with me that any anti-fraud, because it's really two things we are dealing with here. We are dealing with anti-fraud, we are dealing with customer protection systems, yes? The involvement of the police at the end result on a penal level, that could be a real deterrent for persons who would be involved in fraud when you know that you're facing a 15, 20, 25-year term. Don't you think, again going back to my initial thesis about self-regulation and at least some uniformity across the board, that a greater collaborative effort with the police in a more timely manner will assist in the aim here on your part?
Through Chair, I do understand the position being taken. It's something that we all look to build through our compliance units with TTPS and other law enforcement agencies. So I would think the collaboration is good. It's the issues about being able to provide information that they request, but also operating on the information we provide, how quickly that moves forward as well.
Chairman, same part of their submission on page 28. If you look at bullet point number 1 under the rubric legislative reform, you have called for government to establish laws specifically around cybersecurity, amendment of the Electronic Transaction Act, etc. Yes? You are aware, Chairman, and I can ask through you, of the existence now of the legislation. We have the Computer Nuisance Act. We still have the old Theft Act, which is, and Larceny Act, which is very relevant even now. I don't know if you all have amended the concept of shows in actions. Have you all amended it? You know, Chairman, there's a check cannot be stolen because a check is deemed to be a shows in action when it goes into the normal pool. Chairman, although the Court of Appeal was very inventive to sort of take you all out of that position, have you all, as a body, have you all addressed those issues?
Through you, Chair, maybe I'm seeking a little more clarification from Member Scotland.
Yes.
What I would say is where these comments came from is more like making sure that the legislation is a bit stronger in the use of e-signatures, in the use of things. So yes, we've come a long way. We have improved the digital rollout of check imaging, which was last year. Right. You know, these things are building blocks. We are getting there. But there are some more steps to be taken because it is difficult now to present an original check to a court of law right now because of the processes, and it's stored at each member's bank location. So we've passed the legislation that allows for the digital image to be utilized in a court of law. So that's been supportive, but where we're now looking at is like the e-signature level now. With the amount of digital activity happening, a lot of people are online approving bills with e-signatures, and then they say, that's not my e-signature.
Well,
so we do see the need for stronger legislation to help build on that part of the industry.
For Chairman, may I just point them? There's the Data Protection Act, you know, that is in existence. The Electronic Transactions Act. You can also, in this regard, utilize the Copyright Act, and most importantly, have you all, as an association, thought of using the Anti-Terrorism Act? It's a sort of a pillar of legislation, but which will increase your ability to reduce fraudulent activity and present more protection to your customers. Have you all discussed these new pieces of legislation, how they can assist your association?
Mr. Batiste, I think you want to take this one?
Yes, Chair. Just to say that the association does have a legal subcommittee, and the legal subcommittee does review all of the relevant legislation and does provide guidance to all of the financial institutions in terms of how we could make best use of the various pieces of legislation. So the answer would be yes.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just inform your colleagues to the back, the credit union, that we have not forgotten you.
Chairman.
So we are coming directly to you. I know Mr. Remy and I've seen Mr. Neptune, and you look very anxious. So, but we are coming directly to you. But before Member Scotland, I ask you to come back in. This proceeding, it is broadcast live on television as well online. So we always create a platform for our online viewers to submit questions directly to members and officials appearing before this Joint Select Committee. So I'm seeing a question from a member of the public, and to the Bankers Association of Trinidad and Tobago. Can BAT or RBL, I would say BAT because RBL is not before us. I think you represent RBL, of course. Can BAT or RBL say what caused the duplications to credit and debit cards last year affecting merchants like PriceMart and measures implemented to prevent a recurrence. Mr. Batiste, I'm seeing a smile, so I suspect that means that you're going to take this one.
I'll answer that at a general level because there's been a lot of review of those transactions. It actually was related to a currency code, and as a result, a currency code in the transaction. And as a result of an incorrect currency code being utilized, the transactions went at TT and US converted to TT. And that's what contributed to that challenge. And in terms of measures that were implemented by RBL, it really was a second or third check that was being made when a system upgrade takes place, that mistake doesn't occur. So that was following a system upgrade, an incorrect currency code wasn't picked up. That is what resulted in that.
Okay. So in your submissions at page 14, you made reference to romance scams and fraud as a form of cybersecurity. I think for the benefit of the listening public and all of us here before this committee, if you can explain what is the meaning of romance scams and fraud?
All right. So
I've seen everyone smiling. I don't know why, but it's serious business here.
It is serious business. So romance scams are scams where it's social engineering, an aspect of social engineering, where what they do is they purport to Facebook, Instagram, to buddy up through emails as well, phone numbers. They try to get closer to the individual, and they get a level of trust between the person. Always along the lines, most of the time, as romance. Some of it could be persons in prison doing it, or it could be persons...
Under the guise of what?
Under the guise of a romantic relationship building. Right? So the romance... So it starts off as, there's a relationship, it's building, and
I think
nice.
This is very, very important. In this society today.
Is critical. With that happening, there'll then be a scenario about, okay, and even there might even be exchange of monies initially.
Wow.
And then there'll be a hard story, a hard luck story, but I do need to pay, grandmother died, and I have to cover funeral expenses and things of this nature. So these people are duped into releasing their money, and it comes back to the bank to say, this is what unfolded, and therefore, it was under false pretenses. I would like to get my money back.
How is the bank responding to situations like that?
What I can say is that the minute we pick up any sort of awareness of a scenario unfolding, we go both to the person impacted as well as and recommend that they go straight to the police to lodge a crime report.
So customer A is a victim of a romance scam or fraud. Is the bank, once the bank determines that to be a genuine case of fraud, is the bank going to compensate or reimburse the customer?
Very good question. It depends on the stage as where it's at, but generally, if you were the person, and most of this is reported after the fact, and when the investigation is done, we're able to show what happened, I would tend to think it's going to be difficult because you were duped into releasing your funds.
Chairman, it brings back the question, members of Dutch media and saying will not know. In the 80s there was a song, no romance without finance. You got to have a job if you want to be chairman.
But it's a very serious matter.
It is.
It's a very, very serious matter.
Why doesn't the association, again I go back to my main thesis, have some sort of educational outreach to tell the people, look,
that's a serious thing.
Don't do it.
I have never heard of the term romance, fraud, or scam until I started going through your submission. This, to me, is a very, very serious matter, and I can see so many of our young people getting caught up in this thing.
Especially since COVID.
Especially since COVID. I think this is something that we need to educate our citizens soundly, because I can just imagine the amount of our citizens falling victims to this unfortunate practice. Yes, Member Bacchus?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And again, good morning to the members. It's probably a good place for me to get into some of the stuff. I want to deal with some of the cybersecurity elements. But it is interesting that romance fraud is listed under cybersecurity. And I was trying to understand why, and the only thing I probably could come up with in my mind is that you're using electronic means as probably the initiating point. Is that why it's like that?
Through you, Chair, I think it was just the best, well, we felt it was the best section based on what we've been requested to report on. So that's where the means by which it happened was through some sort. It wasn't intrusion or anything. It was just more the social aspect. The social networks are what's heavily used to start that whole romance process. So the social engineering, there are all these various. You have phishing. You have all sorts. We know phishing, but there are a lot of different ones. You do it via voice. You do it via emails. You do it via text. So they're all mechanisms where the person is not before you. You build a relationship and trusting that a picture you see online is really the person you're talking to.
Yeah.
And at some point it leads to some sort of financial impact to the person. They've released funds either through a credit card, they wire money to the person. Different means. They go to MoneyGram and send the money out directly. But all these will fall under that rubric of romance fraud.
So it's more the medium of exchange and or initiation than an actual deep cyber piece itself. And I want to refer to your submission on page 13, specifically under cybersecurity. There are two graphs there. One deal with the number of incidents. Let's take that one first. And I mean, for all intents and purposes, between 2021 and 2023, it's fairly flat. There's a little inflection, it's there, but it's 40, 50 incidents. These incidents are incidents, because I didn't really have a description of what the incidents are. What are these cyber incidents as it relates to your members?
Through you, Chair, you'd see just there it says types of cases include malware, ransomware, phishing, romance scams, and then other. The malware, I think, is fairly well known. It's where somebody, like the example I gave you, could be, it starts with a phishing, you click on the link, and malware is downloaded to your desktop or to your laptop. So that's the malware. Ransomware, similar, but the ransomware takes a different approach. They take control of more with companies. They take control of your environment, and more, you have to either pay or we lock down your operation for a few days, and it's more disruptive to rebuild everything than to just pay this money and do so. Phishing is well known. Romance we spoke to. So these are the sort of categories we've put under the cybersecurity.
True again, Chair, but this is at the point of consumption. This is not at your member bank level. So in other words, there are no incidents in here of cybersecurity issues at your member banks.
Correct.
These are issues with the customers of the banks.
That we have to support, yes. Correct.
So is this committee to understand then that there have been no cybersecurity incidents at your member banks?
None reported. So sorry, Chair.
Sure.
But yes, there are no cybersecurity incidents at the bank.
And I think that's useful information to have.
Yeah, very useful.
Because people think in terms of cybersecurity, when they look at what it is, they look at this and they expect that the attacks are happening at the large institutions. One of the things I also probably can expand, that we probably should have asked for it in here, but we may request it in writing, but you may know. Obviously, the banks are being attacked. And I think that is something that we really didn't get a feel for in the submission. The types of attacks and the frequency and the cadence and the sophistication of the attack that your member banks are under. I think we would request through you, Chair, that if you do, I mean, I'm not asking, because obviously I'm not going to ask you how you're combating it, because that is obviously not a good question to ask. But I think it would be good if we understand the extent to which your security systems and your protection systems are working to repel these kinds of attacks. It was only in the press, might have been yesterday or the day before, I lose track of time, one of our prominent businesses was indicating that they had a cyber attack 5 o'clock in the morning, that their systems were able to quarantine and repel without any human intervention actions and so on. And I'm sure you have automated and autonomous systems that are doing those things. But the awareness that needs to be there as well that this represents something that you're doing, and obviously there's a cost to it. The other thing it represents, and it says costs and losses, and that table represents, and again I'm asking, the value of what those incidents would have been overall. Is that what that represents? It says costs and losses.
Yes, through you, Chair, that's what it represents. But we do have, to clarify, certainly 2022 year where you see that huge jump, that, again, that was related to more ATM theft.
Okay.
So it was called cyber, but it was theft that occurred at ATMs within member banks.
So through your Chair, thanks for picking up on it. That is what happened. I saw this large spike, and the number of incidents actually, yeah. So okay, so that explains it, and thanks very much for doing that. I'll end on the cybersecurity.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to get to
Member Barker. So it's time to thank you very much, members of the Bankers Association. You're not excused. It's not the end of the hearing. So I'll go to your colleagues at the back, the Cooperative Credit Union League. We have a number of questions for you as well, based on your submission. And again, I want to start by thanking you very much for your very comprehensive statement to this Joint Select Committee, and members obviously would need to ask further questions based on these submissions that you've made. So can I ask Member Hislop to open the batting on this?
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions from your submission, but I just want to know I just wanted to share with the public. I believe the credit union has a significant footprint. Credit union system has a significant footprint in the country. Just share with us, how many credit unions do you have in Trinidad and Tobago, and what is your customer base, your membership, I should say.
Police.
Chair, Diane Joseph, I'll take that. The Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago, we have 129 credit unions, 700,000 members, and $19 billion in assets, TT currency.
700,000 members, $19 million.
19 billion.
Billion. Oh, that's why I questioned. 19 billion in assets. So it says that the credit union league or the credit union system in Trinidad and Tobago is quite significant. There is a challenge that we have that you said in your submission. The league does not maintain a record of the number of reports that are made. That's fraudulent reports. And with further identification of the instances of fraud that occurred being one fraudulent job letter, one case of technology fraud, and an incident with the use of a land deed. That is what you've identified in your submission, page 1 in your submission. To what extent, and the question is, to what extent are the relatively low incidents of fraud within the credit union sector attributed to a lack of adequate and or effective mechanisms to detect fraudulent practices? And I wanted to be very clear with that question, because you have $19 billion in assets, 700,000 customers, members. So that seems to be a very low number in terms of fraudulent activities that you've encountered. So share with us. What do you think is the reason for that?
Who's taking that question?
I will take that question, Chair, and maybe you would be provided with support by my Vice President and CEO thereafter. Just to put some context to the corporate, and I take guide from Member Scotland's initial question in terms of the authoritative strength of the Credit Union League. And I just want to put that in context. The League does not have regulatory powers. We can't intrude into credit unions' activities. We have a bylaw, we have a constitution, it's voluntary membership to an extent. And the issue where the league is concerned is in terms of how much intrusive powers does the league have in terms of demanding and coercing and forcing credit unions to do certain things. There is no legislative structure that gives the league that intrusive authority. And I think that is one of the hindrances that the league has in terms of performing its functions. And in terms of the requirement for reporting fraudulent activities, we are regulated by the Commissioner for Cooperative Development. But in terms of anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism, it is the Financial Intelligence Unit, FIU. And there's a direct relationship between the FIU and the member credit unions, and they make those reports to the FIU, as was stated in our submissions. So there is no legal authority for the members to report to the league on those instances. And it's something that we have been advocating for some years in terms of the role and function of the Cooperative Credit Union League as an umbrella body to be given some legislative strength so that we could work in a collaboration with the regulators in terms of ensuring that the work that we do in terms of development could be enhanced by some level of legislative authority that will give us some intrusive powers to interrogate credit unions and get certain information and those things. But we are limited by the legislative structure that currently controls us.
Member Scotland, I recommend.
Chairman, I'm asking this to the credit union. I would want the Bankers Association to answer.
You want to come back to the Bankers Association?
I'm asking both. Yes, it's a question that attaches itself to both. Bankers Association, credit union, don't you all think that the time has come? We are a very small country, but it's one sector, that there's some collaboration between the Bankers Association and the credit union, particularly as it relates to customer protection and fraud in the financial sector, because the universal set will be the financial sector.
Yes.
You both operate within that. I get a sense that there is no... Have you all ever had a meeting, the Bankers Association and the credit union and the league? Has there ever been a meeting with two entities?
Through you, Chair, yes.
Yes.
Through my stint as Bankers Association president.
When?
2 years ago, to recall the actual. We would have had some interaction with certain things that we tried to move forward. May not have been related to fraud, but we would have had interactions on certain dialogues between the two organizations.
So then answer my question. Don't you think that there should be seen that as one sector?
Don't take the shine of the credit union.
No. Don't you think, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Treasurer?
The Bankers Association actually is on a water break now.
Well, I hope, Chairman, I thought that we were ambitious in having both of them today, because the same amount of issues I have to raise, I have to raise with them.
All right.
But don't you all think that there should be some collaborative efforts between your two associations as it relates to customer protection and fraud? I'm just asking.
Mr. Neptune.
Through the Chair, Member Scotland, from what we said to the League, we would readily agree that there should be greater collaboration between the Bankers Association and the Cooperative Credit Union League of Trinidad and Tobago, because as you rightly said, the overarching sector is the financial sector, and both entities represent constituents that operate in the financial sector. The collaboration, as I indicated, should be greater, and particularly relates to protecting, in the bank's case, their clients, and in the credit union's case, our members' interest in relation to preventing fraud and other malfeasance in the movement, so to speak. So in those circumstances, we would really agree that there should be greater collaboration. But to say there's no collaboration whatsoever, that may not be a totally accurate reflection of what exists at present.
Okay.
I will defer and come back, please.
Okay, I recognize our member
Thank you very much, Chair. So sticking with the league, if there's an incident of fraud, as I understand it, the first port of call the member has would be to the credit union itself in order to resolve the issue. And if the member is dissatisfied with what the decision of the credit union is, it will then be escalated to the commissioner, who then operates as sort of a dispute resolution body. And then there's a third level, which is the minister, if I'm not mistaken. If, based on your recommendations or the submissions that you would have given to us, you indicated that there's the need for the strengthening and the better resourcing of the regulatory agencies. In that context that I just outlined, I want you to give us a response in terms of what you mean by strengthening the regulatory agencies in particular. That's one aspect. And two, you also call for timely and pointed regulatory and legislative changes for the sector to treat with the emerging and or changing trends analysis in the context of fraudulent transactions. Can you just give us a little more information or details in terms of that submission?
Okay, with respect to the strengthening of the regulatory authority, in particular we were referring to our direct regulator, the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, and we have been public over the years advocating and lobbying for the strengthening of the regulatory arm for the cooperative sector, because we have recently, when we started to do the review of the legislation, it was discovered that there were over 6,000 outstanding disputes at the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, which to us...
Can you just repeat those numbers?
Over 6,000 outstanding disputes at the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development. Wow. Those are disputes between members and credit unions. Yes. And as such, we felt that the resources that reside at the office was not adequate enough to deal with the resources. Maybe the processes too would have been inadequate. And as such, you found that there was a structure where the commissioner had to hear, if not all, most of the disputes. And I think Mr. Scotland is aware of some of, because members will come to them and complain. And that created a backlog. And we felt that needed to be changed, because the timeliness of the resolution of those disputes, you will have members having disputes for loan issues that will run for years. And it will increase in terms of delinquency and the relationship between the members and the credit union, where we will have to go and take stronger measures in terms of recouping, recovery, and those things. And it is not sitting well in an institution that has a very strong social conscience. And as such, we felt that there should be, and there ought to be, some strengthening of the regulatory arm. One, to deal with the disputes. I know there would have been some recent efforts to enhance the resource capacity at the Office of the Commissioner to reduce the amount of outstanding disputes. But while you're reducing outstanding disputes, there are new disputes that are coming in, and it convolutes the process once again. And as such, we are of the strong belief that the Office of the Commissioner should be enhanced with the adequate resources to deal with the amount of disputes that come forward at it. And then we had a discussion on restructuring what is considered to be a dispute that should go before the Commissioner. We felt that there should be some effort at the local level to have a dispute resolution process that should be initiated early in the thing, without those things backlogging at the Office of the Commissioner. Some things like delinquency and those things, and the extent of the delinquency, whether we should have those things considered as disputes and those things. And those are the things that we are discussing now with respect to the enhancement of the new legislative regime. I know there is a committee that is currently working on an independent cooperative authority that will be looking at the enhanced regulatory regime for credit cooperatives, inclusive of credit unions.
If I understand you correct, the two major complaints you have with respect to this particular process is, one, the length of time it takes, because there are 6,000 disputes. And the second thing is that you want to now implement something like a filtering exercise to determine what is a dispute, because not every disagreement with the credit union should be a dispute. The judiciary normally gives us an annual report, and they disaggregate the number of cases in terms of the length of time that it's pending before the courts. Did a similar exercise like that ever taken place with those 6,000 matters to determine, okay, this matter is less than 1 year old, this is more than a year, this is less than 5 years old, a disaggregation of that, so that you create a priority list in order for these things to be dealt with in a more efficient manner, because at the end of the day, you're dealing with person's savings and their monies.
The league does not, and again, it goes back to who has the authority to do that disaggregation and provide the data. It's really the Office of the Commissioner for Corporate Development. And I know that recently they have started a process to look at reducing the backlog, and they have started a process to enhance. They have enhanced some resources inside of there to deal with current disputes, so that I know there's an effort to bring down that dispute. And they would have the data relative to the age profile of those disputes and those things. So that data will reside with the Office of the Commissioner for Cooperative Development.
Chairman,
Member Scotland?
don't you think it's time to really, and I'm going back to fraud, I'm going back to customer protection. Chairman, everything starts and ends with the Commission of Cooperatives. So in one day, the Commission of Cooperatives may have 4 to 5 disputes before he or she, depending on what view they take of Commissioner. Take it that I'm aware of your Commissioner of Corp's history. And it's unfortunate. What regulatory framework do you think this committee can recommend in order to turpentine that process, get it going?
Mr. Neptune, are you taking this one?
I'll try my best, Chair. Through the Chair, in response to Member Scotland, as indicated by Ms. Remy a short while ago, we have recommended, if to use Member Hussein's language, a filter process to deal with disputes, where in the first instance, we change what is classified as a dispute, so that will limit the number of matters that finds its way down to the Commissioner's office. We have also recommended a change in the structure of the Commissioner's office. As was indicated earlier to the committee, the present system suggests that the Commissioner himself or herself hears every dispute that gets to the office. And we are suggesting that there be some system akin to the different panels, a different panel or two that will hear the disputes, so that will in turn treat with disputes at a quicker, more expeditious basis. We have also recommended or suggested that the Cooperative Credit Union League be given some legislative authority to deal with some of these issues, to limit again further how many disputes find its way to the Commissioner's office. And even the issue of scenarios that are not considered disputes, that we have experienced some challenges over time in terms of timely responses from the Commissioner's office, we have also recommended and suggested that the structure that exists now be changed, and there are better resources to deal with some of the scenarios that presents within the movement itself.
Chairman, through you, page 5 of your submissions to us, page 4, paragraph 5. When asked you were asked about the public awareness campaign, because you'd agree with me that part and process of the reduction of fraud can be public awareness. You said that you've had this public awareness campaign. How effective would you say that this campaign has been? And I go directly to question 5 on page 4. You said that the League has taken measures to mitigate the impact of financial fraud, and this was due diligence and enhanced due diligence measures. We like the phrase, but we'd like you to briefly outline some examples of the due diligence processes that have been applied by your membership, please.
Chair, I'll take that one. In terms of the due diligence processes and the enhanced due diligence, this is in line with the financial obligation regulations and the requirements to conduct due diligence on members coming to do business in the credit union. And we were hosting regular sessions, more sessions than in the past, given the rise in fraud and other criminal activities, to enhance our members' competency and skill set in the credit union, and to share that information with the members of the credit union as to how you assess and look at the members who are coming into the credit union to do business, and the requirements of those members, such as the ID and the utility bills and the deeds, and so that they are processing, and the level of scrutiny that is required. In terms of the enhanced due diligence, we look at the high-risk members, such as those that are classified as politically exposed, and the motor vehicle sector, the SUSU, which is the traditional SUSU that we know, and so forth, and give them guidance as to how they should assess these members when they come forward in an objective manner, and not with everyone being subjected to the same level of due diligence.
Chairman, one more question before I see. There's a dichotomy between, there's one sector, but as it relates to the banking sector, there's an oversight by the central bank. As it relates to the credit union, there's oversight by the Commission of Cooperatives, who I think, Chairman, if you want to increase your lending capacity in a credit union, if your membership takes a resolution to say that, the Commission of Cooperatives still has the overriding right to go against your membership and say, no, I say no, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if he or she exercises that right, Chairman, things can happen to him in the position. And no, take it that I make sure and do my homework. Tell me, you know that in 2005, the government issued a policy proposal which aimed at granting the central bank supervisory oversight over credit unions. Can you indicate what is the policy or the position of the League on the central bank assuming regulatory oversight over the credit union sector, and whether that will help in the reduction of fraud?
Well, let me say it from this context. At present, there is a different dispensation relative to oversight of the credit union sector. We would have had discussions with the government some years ago, and that whole issue of oversight by the central bank was revisited. And in discussions, there was an agreement between the sector and the government to move forward a process for having a policy proposal document relative to the implementation of an independent cooperative authority that will now be the new regulatory body to govern and regulate credit unions. And we are at the committee stage of that process. And Saturday coming, the League is having a meeting to discuss the policy proposal document that has been put forward for public comment relative to that new regulatory regime. So the whole issue of the central bank having oversight, we had discussed that in very granular details. There was an issue way back in 2010, 2014, when the League, and we've been very honest, we challenged because we felt that the unique nature of credit unions and being regulated by the central bank was going to take away from what the reason that for credit unions existing being. We are cooperatives at the end of the day. While we operate in the financial sector, we are cooperatives, member-owned, member-controlled with democratic principles inside of there. And as such, we argued against the rigid regulation under the central bank, and it was agreed to, and there is now discussion on an independent cooperative authority that The policy proposal document has been developed. We had discussions in early instance with a cabinet-appointed committee that was led by the then Senator Robert Lee Hunt, and that committee had recommended, and there was a cabinet paper on that in terms of going forward with that independent cooperative authority, and we are at the policy proposal document stage. We have agreed also to compulsory deposit insurance for credit unions, and that policy position paper is before cabinet for its consideration, if I could recall, because it was developed, it was circulated to the movement, and it has been forwarded for onward discussion.
Can I ask, I recognize member Lakshmi-Dale Ramdale.
Thank you, Mr. Remy. So what I'm hearing from you then is that the position advocated by the way of a policy in 2005, which gave birth to a bill in 2011, which then gave birth or was changed to another bill in 2014, and we've had no real change in the legislative regime governing credit unions since all of this, but we've moved to stages, and that you all are now moving past that and moving towards something entirely different, because the position has been that the credit union bill was going to introduce regulation by the central bank, and you said that that wasn't, and I'll get back to that question too about, you said the rigidity of central bank regulation, but is it that now this proposal for an independent body will take over what was envisaged as the function of the central bank as well as the FIU in terms of AML regulation? And also, because I'm hearing from you in the course of the conversation that you seem to be more amenable to the position of the league becoming a self-regulatory organization with certain amounts of powers. Is it that the position going forward and what you would like to see happen is this independent body for regulation that will regulate both the league as an SRO as well as regulate all aspects and do away with central bank, commissioner of cooperative development, and all of those separate, and FIUTT as separate regulators for different areas of business that credit unions might be involved in?
The issue of FIU is still going to be in existence. They are, by the laws of Trinidad and Tobago, they are the regulators when it comes.
You're not proposing a change to that regulation aspect?
No, definitely not. It is the direct regulation of credit unions with respect to their daily operations, as exists now under the Commissioner for Cooperative Development. And what may eventually happen is that one of the discussion points would have been that the current construct with the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, that would have been absorbed and morphed into the new regulatory body, so that the developmental aspect for the cooperative movement will continue to be there. Because remember, at the beginning was the Commissioner for Cooperative Development, and it was not just a rigid regulatory arm. It was to encourage the development of cooperatives to build that socio-economic construct in Trinidad and Tobago. And we wanted to maintain the developmental aspect of the cooperative movement, so that the role that the Commissioner's office plays now relative to development, part of that role should be enhanced through the league, and those are the regulatory strength we believe that the league should be given, so that there would be that. The league has played that developmental role over the years, but we have done that on the basis of our existence as a body that have been formulated through the membership.
Okay. Now, you spoke about the position that you all took with respect to central bank regulation, the rigidity of central bank regulation. But in reality, since, that 2005 policy and coming forward, we've seen some credit unions, and within your sector, there's a very, very, very big and a wide spectrum of organizations. We've seen some credit unions get to the size of what could be considered like a bank. And there's a lot of activity, there's a lot of money. They've grown, they've diversified, they're investing in all sorts of different areas, and people are utilizing the services of credit unions to finance businesses and so on. Is there, when we talk about credit unions and we still maintain that they are very community-based and so on, that isn't applicable across the board, is it? Because some of them are operating as very large financial institutions. And so the rigidity in terms of the need for regulation might actually exist. I'm not saying that it has to be the central bank and an independent body cannot do it, but what about the duplicity of resources? We have a regulator in the person of the central bank that regulates bank and non-bank financial institutions. And the reality is that some credit unions, despite the fact that you are cooperatives and owned by your members, you are operating at the level of, and when you look at assets and so on, they are operating at the level of non-bank financial institutions. And so having a separate regulator to perform essentially the same functions that the central bank has been and is equipped to perform and trained and experienced in performing for a number of years in relation to the banks and non-bank financial institutions may be duplicitous in terms of we're looking at resources as well here, right? Staffing an entire organization and a whole new regulator. We have central bank, we have TTSEC, we have the FIU to deal with all the AML side of regulation. Is it that the central bank cannot, in your view, really adapt to being an appropriate regulator for the credit union sector?
Who's taking that? Mr. Neptune.
Well, Member Lachmia, what we treated chair, what we said to the league, the first thing we'll say, and we want to make it very clear, that we are not averse to regulations. We are not averse to regulations, and we are not averse to, I would say, stronger regulations. And the term, the rigidity, as used by my president, that may be a little bit misconstrued in terms of to suggest that at the league we don't want to be regulation. We are very appreciative of the fact that the movement has a very large footprint in Trinidad and Tobago in terms of our assets and how we impact persons. What we are saying is that the socio-economic construct of credit unions, we have the firm belief, will not be properly satisfied if it is regulated by central bank. Under the proposed legislation, as has been drafted now, there's an independent authority with legislative powers to treat with the movement as a whole, both non-financial cooperatives and financial cooperatives as we are credit unions. So we are not saying don't regulate, because we are aware that there can be significant fallout in the event that something untoward should happen in the movements. We are not saying don't regulate.
Which we've seen.
Yes, we are not saying don't regulate. Right, but we have also seen similar fallout in other financial areas. Sure. Yeah. So we are not unique in that respect. So we are saying yes, regulate, but we are just saying a different method or a bit of different philosophy in the context of the regulations when considering the credit union movement as a whole.
Through you.
But before Member Scotland, Member Washington,
that's fine. I mean, I would want to perhaps dig a little deeper, if you could, and just say that why you feel that construct isn't. Why do you feel that? Oh, and I don't know if it's played out in your new policy position and so on that has been put forward. But why do you feel that the central bank isn't capable of exercising that function and implementing that construct as a different? Because of course they regulate the banks, the non-banks, insurance. Mm-hmm. So they would have different constructs in place in terms of how they regulate entities of various size, function, etc. So why? I mean, what has led you to believe that they would not be capable or best serve the interests of the credit union movement? That's what I'm trying to get at, really.
Okay, and through the chair, all the institutions which you have referenced, Member Lachiel, don't have the construct of the credit union movement. The credit union movement is very, very unique in its own right. It's the only, we'll say, financial institution that is owned directly by the membership. So it's a different application of what obtains in the field. The membership direct a particular credit union what they want the credit union to do and what the credit union cannot do within the framework of legislation. Oh. So in that particular scenario, we have the full belief it will be very difficult to have a full appreciation for that from the principles of the central bank and what it entails in terms of regulating us as a movement. As indicated by President Remy, the FIU regulations, we are not saying remove that. We are saying we should still be subjected to those sort of regulations to maintain control and to mitigate against risk. But in terms of the other areas of the movement, we are saying that that will be best suited to be regulated by a body or entity who has a full appreciation for that issue and the uniqueness of that issue.
Okay. I know before Member Scotland, Member Bacchus had asked for an intervention. So
thank you, Chair.
Member Bacchus, we will go to Member Scotland.
Yeah, thank you. And let me be the first to say to the Credit Union League, good afternoon, because we've been here since this morning. Let me, I like to get into the technical slant of this. Cybersecurity. And when I looked at your operational risks, your top 5 things that would have happened in the last, top 4 things happened in the last 5 years, I don't see it as one of the things that are under direct emphasis in what is happening. I preface that by saying I have been a member of a credit union since 1989, and I had my book. And I walk in and get my book updated from time to time, and I do that. So it seemed fairly rudimentary what was happening. I know, of course, times have changed since then to now, and you've become a bit more technically sophisticated. But one, is cybersecurity really a prominent concern for the league and its members? And without tipping a hat in one way or the other, is it something that you need to place more emphasis in, less emphasis in? Are your people at tremendous risk? Is the league, and in the case of the banks, the things that are happening with them with cybersecurity affecting the customers of their members, in case of the association? What is happening in the league, and where do you see that? Do you have that information?
Who is taking this question? Ms. Joseph?
Chair, I'll take that.
Yes.
Yes, the league is concerned about cybersecurity, the threats that have been emerging over time, more recently in larger numbers. Fortunately, we have not had that at the level of the credit union movement in any significant way. However, having seen and read about what would have been taking place over the last couple of months in Trinidad and Tobago, we would have engaged experts in the field, organizations. We have hosted sessions already with our membership on cybersecurity, and we have those experts at this time visiting credit unions, doing assessments, looking at the level of risk and seeking to bridge those gaps by recommendations. Along with that, enhancement of policies and the strengthening of their firewalls and different aspects of the electronic portfolio in the credit union.
But let me, sorry, member, but it's just to follow up on that question and the response. We are aware that there are some credit unions that have grown large. I don't want to name some of them, but you have RAND, Eastern Credit Union, you have Police, very large credit unions. And then you have the smaller credit unions who may not have the financial wherewithal to invest sufficiently to build the robustness that they need to build to prevent fraudsters from impacting their members. So that to me is cause for some kind of concern, because they may not have the financial resources to do so compared to larger credit unions. The question is, how is the league? What systems have you put in place to assist the smaller credit unions who may not have the capacity to build that level of resilience?
Chair, we have taken that on board, and we agree that the funding is a challenge and will continue to be a challenge for the smaller credit unions. And what we have been doing is engaging in discussions with the experts on having shared services. We continue to have different arms of shared services at the league, and we have started a discussion of having a shared services platform for the smaller credit unions where they can get the product to the credit union at a shared cost. So that is very much in discussion at this point in time to reduce the cost of any specific member. And the experts are talking with those credit unions at this time to come up with the appropriate mechanism to take that forward.
Yeah, because certainly you don't want a situation where a member of a smaller credit union is more exposed when compared to a member of a larger credit union who may have the capacity to invest sufficiently in that level of robustness. Member Bacchus?
Yeah, thanks again, Chair, and thanks for the answer. And there are a couple things that springboard from that. One is that looking at the way the credit unions are and how the operations of they tend to be, and you have the experts going through them, they will be exposed at an individual level as entities. Your members will be exposed at an individual level, not necessarily the customers of the members, but the members themselves, meaning that those are the places that they would attack in cases of this. The thing that will hark back to what Member Scotland and Member Lutchmedial were talking about is that this is being self-imposed. The league is imposing, the members are doing it on themselves in their own best interest. In the case of the banks, they have to adhere to specific things that are dictated to them by an authority. Mm-hmm. And so that authority defines and in some ways assures specific levels of protection for the institutions themselves and based on the guidelines for the customers of those institutions. Those are the kinds of things that make the arguments that Member Scotland are bringing as part of why those things should be enforced by some regular thing. And Mr. Neptune, the rigidness that you're talking about, I think that is where people get the idea that when you say the rigidity of what a central bank would bring, they associate those things to be the same. And I would like you to clear that up. So I know you said it's not because they don't believe they can, but let's look at what's happening in the security space. The members of the Bankers Association have no choice. They were given some guidelines, they did their own self-assessment, they've determined what they have. Central bank sends in inspectors, they look at it, and if you don't adhere to what they've said, you have problems. You are doing it another way, self-imposing it, looking at it from your own perspective. You're probably going to end up in the same place, you're just doing it a different way. How does the public, how do I as a member, part owner of the credit union, feel secure in that environment, and how do you plan to take it forward?
Sure.
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. Let me start by saying it may not be an accurate reflection to say that there's no obligation on the credit union movement with respect to certain security. We are regulating in that respect by FIU. And FIU directs what standards are required in any credit union. And it directs that we must have a compliance system, and we must have a compliance department, compliance officers, and a compliance program which has to be reviewed. We are also subjected to, in the movement, to investigations. And it happens ever so often where there are orders from the court that they go to credit unions to get information. So it will not be an accurate reflection to say that what we do are totally self-imposed. We are governed by regulations also and guidelines that we must comply with. So I'll go back to my earlier statement. So it is not that we are adverse to regulations, because we are functioning under a regulatory framework. But in the overarching responsibility for the movement, we are saying that will be better served elsewhere. And as I said, we are subjected to financial regulations, just like the banks. And we have to adhere to guidelines also.
But you understand in the case of cybersecurity,
yes,
that it's different. I don't know that the FIU telling you regulating your cybersecurity.
No, they don't regulate the cybersecurity. They don't regulate cybersecurity.
So what I'm saying is that the guidelines, this is being done. By the way, this is not a criticism. This is you've recognized that you have a risk, and even though based on your submission, it is not in your top 5 of your operational risks you related to reduction in loans, increases in delinquency, closure of small businesses, unemployment, underemployment, as risk to the movement itself. And so cybersecurity doesn't fit in that top 5, but it can. And so while certain aspects of the operations are controlled by entities like the FIU, the emerging risks that you have that will be left to you to mitigate are already being almost directed to at the banks. And the intent there is to protect the members as well as the banks themselves. That is where I was going with that. So you understand the difference between it. Yeah.
Chairman,
yes.
Through you.
But Mr. Neptune, okay. Member Scotland.
Thank you. Chairman, through you, I want to pose my last one question, but to both entities.
All right, so but before...
Yes, the question relates to both entities, Chairman.
Yes. He's looking to eat 2 cherries with 1 bite. But
a good skill.
Just for information for all members of the committee and the officials before us, we will end at 12:30 because there's a sitting of the Senate at 1:30, and of course we have members here of the Senate, and I have to also go there and respond to some questions. Member Scotland.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me start with the credit union. You will ask you now first. What would you recommend to this committee as a recommendation we can make to the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago can be a measure or measures in strengthening the safeguards and protection systems in your area of endeavor to assist in decreasing anti-fraud and increasing customer protection? We have 4 minutes. So I asked credit union first, and then the bankers.
But taking into consideration,
through you, Chair.
But of course, taking into consideration that the 4 minutes that we have, it includes closing statements.
Well, maybe that could be your closing. Chair, maybe that could be their closing statement.
I'll dictate when we have closing statements.
Okay, and thanks again for the question, Mr. Scotland. And we would really want to see some enhanced legislative measures that are put in place, and we would want to be part of the development of those legislation so that we could make our input into the unique nature of credit unions, and not only the unique nature, the fact that we would want to continue to make our contribution to the economic development. So we would want to sit at the table of the policy developmental stages with respect to those enhanced legislation, so we could bring our input to bear on the development of those legislations.
Chairman, the Bankers Association.
Who's taking it? Ms. Passos?
I will, and certainly in the interest of time, Chair. We asked for something really small, and that's really centralized databases that would help us to verify.
Okay.
You have Minister Bacchus here.
So we have reached the stage where members, or rather the officials before us, from the 2 organizations, will be invited to make closing remarks. So I don't know if the same member who would have made opening statements will make the close. It's entirely up to you, but you're invited to make some closing remarks before we bring an end to today's proceedings.
I would go first. I would want to take the opportunity to thank the committee for giving us the space to express our views, and I want to take the opportunity in the presence of the Bankers Association to say that the Cooperative Credit Union League is open to collaboration and engagement to discuss these developing trends that could impact on the wider society. And we have taken the invitation from Mr. Scotland, and we are open to engagement, and we would hope that those collaborative efforts could augur well for the development of the movement. And we would look forward to our enhanced legislation, working in collaboration with the other aspects. And just to say one thing I didn't say before, in the development of our legislative regime, yes, the central bank is part of that committee that is working with us in the development of this new legislation. So they have an input, a direct input in the framing and development of that legislation. I needed to say that to the committee before we close. So again, thanks for the opportunity, and we look forward to further collaboration going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Remy. Ms. Passos?
Thank you, Chair. And in short, just would like to thank the committee. I mean, the issues of fraud, cyber, and other threats. We see, an escalation in this field, particularly as we continue to grow out our digital platforms, and so we expect to see increasing trends in that regard. And so I'm very thankful to be brought here today to confer with the committee. And President Remy would be very happy to hear that the Bankers Association is also very, very willing to partner and share information with the cooperative credit unions on emerging fraud trends that we're seeing, not only in this market, but on information that we have through other market involvement as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and I do hope you would take Mr. Remy's and take him up on his offer. Hopefully, when the both organizations appear before us, we would like to hear, or rather, the entire country would appreciate that level of collaboration, because hearing that the credit union movement, has over 700,000 members, and I'm sure the bank is perhaps a little bit more than that, but that's almost the entire population. And we are here representing the entire population of Trinidad and Tobago, and of course they stand to benefit significantly by closer collaboration between the both organizations as well as other financial institutions. So I want to take the opportunity on behalf of all members of this Joint Select Committee for the time that you have taken towards making formal written submissions to the Joint Select Committee, as well as coming in person to appear and answer questions. I would like to also take the opportunity to thank all committee members for their contribution and their robust participation, as well as the staff of the Office of the Parliament. I mean, everything that happens here cannot be done without the support of the staff, of the parliamentary staff. They work very, very hard behind the doors to prepare members for these proceedings, to circulate submissions, that you would have presented before this meeting. So I want to thank all of them for their professionalism and the work that they continue to do, the great work that they continue to do in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. And last, but certainly not least, members of the viewing and listening audience who would have participated as well and submitted their questions to the officials present. So there being no other business before this committee, I declare the meeting to be adjourned. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That was a great meeting. Thank you so very much. I appreciate it. Thank you, sir.